potlucks, I never eat the salad. And because I've been in too many homes and seen like cats sitting on the kitchen preparation area and budgerigars flying over the food, and so I only eat stuff that has been baked or boiled multiple times. And so I leave salads for home when I know how it's been prepared. And I always eat the baked or boiled or roasted food at potluck, because the chance of me getting, eating some cat hair or something, it's gone down if it's gone through the oven. So this afternoon, I wasn't quite sure what I'm supposed to be talking about this afternoon, but my wife says if you ask me a question, then she has to tell me when to stop, because I just talk and talk and talk. So I will try and talk about a few things this afternoon. I want to talk primarily about some of the signs of the second coming, because we concluded our service this morning by talking about Jesus, the Son of Man, and he's coming in the clouds of glory. So I wanted to talk this afternoon about some of the signs of the second coming, because everywhere I go, I hear Adventists saying prophecies are being fulfilled in front of our eyes. And if you pause to ask and say, well, exactly which prophecies are you talking about? They go real silent. So prophecy is being fulfilled. Which prophecy? Well, I'm not sure, but I know it's being fulfilled. So I thought I'd talk this afternoon about some trends that are affecting our world today, not just South Africa or Canada or Britain or Germany, wherever we may be from, and talk about how they are indeed signs of the coming of Jesus Christ. So some of this you'll know, some of it you won't know. I hope you find it interesting. It's not really a Bible study per se, but as we go through this material, I hope it's engaging. Thank you very much, brother. And so let's open with a word of prayer and ask the Holy Spirit to bless us this afternoon. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the beautiful Sabbath day we're enjoying here in Cape Town. Father, we thank you for the weather that's outside, and I thank you that we have the freedom and the peace and security to come and gather like this during the Sabbath hours. Father, as we discuss these matters now, I pray for the outpouring of your Holy Spirit upon this congregation, upon myself as I speak and as I share. Lord, may the words I share be from your throne of grace, and may the purpose of today come true, that we're all drawn closer to you. So, Father, guide us now in this conversation, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so I want to talk about some mega trends that are affecting our world today. Doesn't matter where you live in the world, this is going to affect you. The first is we're now living in what economists call the fourth industrial revolution. So the first industrial revolution was back in England, in the late 1700s. That's the song Jerusalem, which talks about those dark and satanic mills. You familiar with that song, Jerusalem? Yes, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, dun, 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 dun. Did you not know that song? Yeah, okay. Well, it's a protest song at the impact of urbanization and mechanical production on the working poor. It's not a song about the coming of Jesus at all. It's a protest song at the dehumanizing things of like having kids working 14 hours a day in the mills. So the first industrial revolution, the key industries were railroads and the steam engine, and that brought in mechanical production. The second industrial revolution, the key technology was electricity and the assembly line, and that ushered in mass production. That was the late 19th, early 20th century. The third industrial revolution, this is when I was born, it was the 1960s onwards. The key technologies are computers and semiconductors and personal computing, and the internet has ushered in a connectivity that we've never seen before in our world, and now we're living in the fourth industrial revolution. This is where you now have integrated IT systems, smart and 3D manufacturing, and we're looking at global integration economically, politically, technologically, and sociologically. So when the third industrial revolution came along, I was at college in England doing a business degree, and I was sitting in a computer lab, and my cousin was doing computer science, and he was sitting like 5 computers away from me, and he said, do this, Conrad. And we had DOS-based computers back then. And if you remember what DOS-based systems were? Yes. We used to use something called Lotus Notes before Excel came out. Everything had to be typed in as formulae before you could just drag and drop with Excel. And so he said, you go into this software called Pegasus Mail, and you go through all this complicated process, and you type me a message like saying, hi Dan, how are you? And then you press send, he says, and 30 seconds later, it pops up on my computer screen. He said, it's called electronic mail. And I said, nobody's going to worry about that. Like, why, I just can walk across here and talk to you. Why would I send you an email? How little did I know about the progress of technology. But now with integrated IT systems, if you go on Amazon or if you fly somewhere now, When I flew here 2 nights ago, Thursday night, they didn't check my passport in O'Hare. They had me line up in front of a retina scanner, and they just checked my retina. And I said, oh yeah, you're in some database. You are who you say you are. And I was in Armenia a couple of years ago, and I gave them my passport, and it wouldn't go through the reader. So they had a retina scanner there as a backup in case my passport failed. But these days, you buy something in Cape Town and the whole world electronically knows it, all the necessary financial systems. Or you're on a plane and you buy something, you give them a credit card, and somehow it appears in your bill a few days later. And it's incredible what we're seeing today. But anyway, we're in the fourth industrial revolution. Now, you've heard the phrase, the Great Reset, have you? Yeah? Now, the Great Reset did not come from the World Economic Forum. It started out in the global financial crisis in 2008 by a US scholar looking at the housing crisis that came after the global financial crisis. But it was popularized by Dr. Klaus Schwab. He's the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. He looks just like a baddie out of the James Bond movies. I mean, all he needs is a white cat on his lap with his bald head and his German accent. And, we have this to make you comply, yeah? So, he just looks like a baddie out of a James Bond movie. But he wrote a book called COVID-19 and the Great Reset in 2020. And his basic thesis is this. He said that a national government can solve national problems, at least theoretically, all right? But when you have a global problem, when every national government is focused on solving the problems from a national perspective, you don't get a global solution. That in order to have a global solution to a global problem, you need to have a global authority. That's the basic thesis of his writings. And that's where the Great Reset is going. The Great Reset is an attempt to move from national governments dealing with global problems to one global authority dealing with the global problems that we have in our world today. Now, the Great Reset involves moving corporations from stakeholder capitalism to shareholder capitalism. So stakeholder capitalism or shareholder capitalism means if you buy a share in, let's say, Ford Motor Corporation, the board of Ford Motor Corporation is legally obliged, they have a fiduciary duty to maximize the value of your share and to maximize the dividends, the return on that share. That's their legal duty. And that's why you can trust them with the money you invest in the company. But that's now out of favor. Now we have stakeholder capitalism, where the corporations have what is known as an ESG index, environmental, social, and governance indices. So, for instance, when it comes to governance, they want to know how many, three-eyed lesbians you have on your board. And if you don't, why not? Okay, I'm talking hyperbolically here, but I'm not far off. Okay? They want to have representation on the board of every possible, type of human being that's out there. And so when it comes to environmental, then they're looking to close down a lot of corporations around the world because they don't meet global climate change targets and so forth. So the ESG index means that some companies are going very woke. You understand the phrase woke? Like they're pushing political correctness, gender theory, race theory, critical race theory, and so forth. And so that's why you have companies coming out, and there's a very famous beer in America called Bud Light. I think you have it here in South Africa as well. And in March of this year, they decided to have this very famous gay man called Dylan Mulvaney. He became their influencer for the month of March when there's a big basketball tournament on among all US colleges. It's called March Madness, and all the college kids are drinking Bud Light like nothing else. And he came out as the major promoter for this. And there was this massive public backlash. Nobody wanted to touch Bud Light. And Bud Light just crashed. Their sales just disappeared. And their corporation will probably never recover from that. And so this is a public backlash against corporations who are pushing woke ideology. Something else about the Great Reset, though, and we saw it in the pandemic, was that in the Great Reset, governments have their policies implemented by corporations. So a corporation becomes an extension of the government. So whatever the government policy is now implemented by the corporation. This is a classic definition of fascism. Fascism is, capitalism is where the capital in a society is spread across the people. You can buy and sell shares. You have a stake in society. Communism is where a small ruling group, such as the Communist Party, controls all the capital in society and everybody else is a slave. And fascism is a halfway house where you're allowed to have private property, but that private property must be used for what the government calls the common good. And the papacy is actually very close in its economic outlook to a form of economic fascism, actually. But in the Great Reset, the idea is that if the government can't do something legally, then the corporations do stuff on behalf of the government. Because you can change the government at the ballot box, but you can't change the board of Ford Motor Corporation. You have no democratic control over that. So, for instance, in the pandemic of the last 3 years, when the US Supreme Court said that it was unconstitutional for President Biden to impose vaccination mandates on corporations with more than 100 employers, so the US Supreme Court said that's not constitutional, you can't do it. President Biden's response to the corporations was, we'll do it anyway. And many corporations did that. So in the Great Reset, your democracy effectively ceases to function because it doesn't matter who's in government, the corporations always implement the decisions of essentially what we call the deep state. And you can't get rid of the deep state. The second megatrend that we're looking at these days, so the net effect of that is that democracy is losing its value in many countries around the world today. And in many countries today, it doesn't matter who you vote for, you still get the same government policies coming through. You're just changing who's allowed to steal from the public purse for 4 years. That's all you're doing when you vote politicians in. But the essential government policies don't change that much. Then you come to the next trend, which is the arrival of CBDCs, otherwise known as central bank digital currencies. Now, at the moment, most of us use what is known as a fiat currency. Fiat is from Latin, it means let it be or let it manufacture. And so this is like the pound sterling, the rand, the dollar, the yen, and the euro. And so those are issued by central banks, and they depend essentially upon public having confidence that this stuff functions as money. But what's happening in our Western world is that all of our fiat currencies are dying. The rand is losing value, yes. Yeah. The dollar's losing value, the pound is losing value. All the currencies are dying. And when you say that the rand is down against the dollar, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day because they're both dying. It's only a matter of who's going to die first. And they're not going to last much longer the way things are going. The Federal Reserve estimates that the dollar today has lost almost 99% of its purchasing power from when Nixon took the US off the gold standard in the 1970s. So your dollar now will buy less than 1% of what it did in the 1970s. So we are now moving towards central bank digital currencies. So you've heard of cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin is the most famous, and Solana and Ethereum. Shiba Inu and stuff like that. Those are not central bank digital currencies. That's a manifestation of decentralized finance. So if you get a salary now, the chances are it's paid into a bank account. Is that right? Now you don't have a legal right to a bank account, do you? No. You have to apply to a bank for permission to have an account with them. And the bank can say yes or no. And if you want to wire money from Cape Town to, let's say, London, your local bank in Cape Town sends it to a regional bank in Joburg. They send it to, say, Lloyd's in London, then they send it to the regional bank where your person banks. So there are multiple banks in the bank wiring system, and any one of them can turn down a transfer. And so that's why it's centralized finance. And decentralized finance, which is these cryptos, that allows for peer-to-peer transactions. Like I can send you Bitcoin without going through any government system or any approval system. That's why governments hate it so much, because it bypasses all government control. So in anticipating the death of the rand, the pound, the euro, and the yen, our Western governments are developing digital currencies, such as Bitcoin. That's not Bitcoin, that's Britcoin. That will be the British pound, the digital dollar. The Chinese already have a digital yuan, and that will be controlled by the central banks of each of those countries. So the point about central bank digital currencies is that every transaction has to go through the CBDC system. Nothing is outside of it. Well, that means that if you have a teenage son and you say, I'll pay you, I don't know, 20 rand to cut the garden lawn this morning, on a Sunday morning, and you give him 20 rand, that's a non-tax transaction. The government has no idea when you gave your son 20 rand. I mean, you may charge him 20 rand for his evening meal, as you know, so there's a back and flow of food with your children, of money with your kids. But that's a transaction that the government has no idea about, and you have economic freedom because of that. With central bank digital currencies, there will be no central bank digital currency like physical coupons. It will all be coupons on the blockchain, which means if I want to pay my son, I've got to run that through the Federal Reserve in America. Now, that means the Federal Reserve, they can tax every transaction. They will tax every transaction. And that means the Federal Reserve knows every transaction that's taking place, every economic transaction they know. And it also means that they can determine what they do and do not wish to allow for transactions. So the British government, they said in 22 that there could be some socially beneficial outcomes for that, preventing activity which is seen to be socially harmful in some way. What this means is that if the Federal Reserve in America doesn't want you to buy ammunition for your 9mm, then they can just stop all transactions, and your Second Amendment is worthless. If the Federal Reserve in America decides that great controversy is hate speech, as well they may well come to that conclusion, they could stop you ever buying great controversy again using your digital dollar. And so they can steer your expenditure. And they do it already. So in America right now, if you get a food stamp from the federal government, like a little debit card, and you can buy food with it, for many years you could buy Coca-Cola and chocolate biscuits, but you couldn't buy organic vegetables with that. The government was steering you towards certain food industries. You could buy pork chops and lamb and chicken, but you couldn't buy certain vegetables because the government was forcing you to buy certain preferred industries. So once you have a CBDC in place, then the government determines what you are or are not allowed to spend your money on. Now that's the end of economic freedom, and it's the end of all economic privacy as well. So there's a great paper here from the Bitcoin Institute on why the US should reject central bank digital currencies. You can check it out later if you want. But in the American century, the 20th century, we celebrated liberal democracy, free market capitalism. We idealized small government because we know that powerful governments present a temptation to corruption and authoritarianism. But now we're moving in the 21st century to a philosophy in our Western governments where a strong state starts to have a direct influence over the economic, social, and other values of an entire population. Some other problems for CBDCs, they penalize low-income households because many low-income people don't have bank accounts. They don't want them. The reason they don't want them is because they can't afford the penalties if they go into overdraft. And so they just stay out of the banking system altogether. Every transaction will be taxed with CBDCs, even those among family members. Every bank account can be taxed at source via a haircut. So, Michigan has a law, apparently, that says, it's from the 1860s, no wife can get a haircut without her husband's permission. It's one of those laws that has never been enforced as far as I can see. If I were to suggest to my wife that she can't have a haircut without my permission, she'd probably say you no longer have a wife. But anyway, you wives can give me your thoughts on that later. But you've heard of a haircut. When I was living in Cyprus in 2006 and 2005, there were too many euros in the Greek banking system. And it was causing inflation, and they were joining the Eurozone. And so the European Central Bank said to the Greek government, you need to tax everybody 10% of their bank accounts tonight. And the next morning, we all woke up, and there was no prior knowledge about this. We discovered that everybody just lost 10% of their savings and checking accounts just gone, just like that. And that's known as a haircut in economic parlance. And we'd all had a haircut because there were too many euros in the system, so the government just took them from our accounts. So with CBDCs, they can also charge negative interest rates, which means they penalize saving. So if you want to save, but they're charging you 2% negative interest rate, that means if you save 100 euros, so let's say 100 digital rand for a month, at the end of the month, they'll take 2 of those rand from you. And the next month, they'll take 2 more from you. So you're incentivized to spend your money as fast as you can, and that keeps the economy going. You can't build up savings. When you can't build up savings, you can't build up economic wealth. And generally, democracies rely on a functional middle class because the poor are too worried about daily survival to worry about local government, and the wealthy are too worried about preserving their wealth. Most local government comes from the middle classes. And so if you eliminate the possibility of having a middle class strata in your society, you effectively gut local democracy as well. So the European Central Bank are actively rolling out their digital euro. They're calling for limits of 3,000 euros per person. Well, if it costs you 4,000 euros a month to live in Germany, but you can only have a maximum of 3,000 euros a month in your account, that means you can never stop working. You follow that, yes? That means effectively you're an economic slave. You can't step out of the system because you can't build up savings to have time away from work. And the digital euro will be programmable, so it'll only be spent on socially desirable activities. So this is what's coming, whether we like it or not. Our fiat currencies are dying in front of our eyes. We all see that happening. And they're going to be replaced by CBDCs. And I think about 180 governments or so around the world are actively developing CBDCs. So It's like a train coming down the track and there's nothing we can do to stop it. President Biden signed an executive order in 22 called This Is the Number. You can check it out on the Federal Register online. And he's looking to have a digital dollar but within 2 to 4 years from now. And he wants to be able to track and monitor all transactions of all US citizens. So that means the end of economic freedom. It also means the end of economic privacy. It would also mean that there would have to be central banks and online processors all part of the system, and that creates vast hackable databases. In Shanghai, they just lost the personal data of over 700 million Chinese. It was hacked into because the digital yuan is already enforced there, and it created a massive scandal. All people there, everybody's personal data got leaked out onto the internet in Shanghai. Beyond that, though, freedom depends on privacy. And privacy is the right to have your own personal self. And those who don't care about freedom of speech are generally those who have nothing to say. And for preachers and for sharing the gospel, when that becomes declared hate speech, privacy and freedom of speech and the right to speak are very important things. And so what CBDCs essentially allow for is the governments in any society to censor and deplatform any voices that disagree with the dominant narrative. And censorship in history has never come from the poor. Censorship only comes from the wealthy elites in society who want to maintain their position in society, so they close down any voices that challenge their position in society. So censorship is a tool of the dominant groups in society to maintain their position. And so this is how we see these CBDCs being developed. This is the language around it. Good examples of this are recently in Canada. We had Prime Minister Trudeau. You may have heard of Trudeau. They had a truckers' convoy last year. They were protesting the lockdowns and the mandates. And so the truckers all drove to Ottawa, and so he froze their bank accounts and the cryptocurrencies, not just of the truckers, but everybody who gave to the convoy fundraising, and closed them down. And he claimed that under the power of emergency, but it really was a warning of what's coming our way, that if you disagree with the dominant narrative of the political party in power today, you're going to be shut down economically. So, what does it mean? CBDCs mean customized restrictions for every individual. It would restrict the purchase of targeted items such as guns, ammo, and Bibles. Now, I'm from America, so when I talk about guns and ammo, that's a big deal for Americans, all right? Because that's our guarantee against totalitarianism in the American Constitution. But Bibles, great controversy, steps to Christ, that can also be targeted as well. It will also be used to restrict air travel. Britain is talking about phasing out all commercial air travel by 2030 in the grounds of environmental protection. Taxes and fines can be automatically deducted from your account. Your expiry dates on your CBDCs, like they're time limited, like you buy bread, it goes rotten, so do your CBDCs if you don't use them. Britain is talking about location limits on purchases. So Britain is talking about, you've heard of these 15-minute cities, where you live within a 15-minute radius of your home? And some of the politicians are now talking about you can use your Bitcoin within that 15-minute radius. That means you can travel beyond that 15-minute radius of your home because you've got no currency, you can't buy anything, you can't pay for food, you can't pay for travel. This is essentially like open-air prisons. The idea comes from the Soviet Union, but now it's being pushed, these 15-minute cities, on the grounds of reducing carbon dioxide emissions to allegedly protect the planet. Food purchases can be rationed, and spending limits can be set. So CBDCs are something for us to be aware of because they ultimately allow for global control of all transactions on planet Earth, either by one world government or by a world authority, which is what the papacy is calling for. They can also be tied to the new digital identities and global health passports. And if you're following the new WHO health treaty that's coming out, it's about the most draconian and totalitarian thing you'll ever see in your life. And it gives the World Health Organization executive the right to declare a global emergency on any issue and to override all national laws and to redistribute land and property and investments and finances to meet certain environmental target goals. This is the stuff of nightmares, but it's being rapidly pushed at the World Health Organization. And CBDCs will be a part of that. So what it means is, just like with the Chinese social credit scheme, is that your access and utilization of economic resources and the ability to have a job, it will be based on your social credit score, such as what you believe, who you vote for, what you post online, what you watch online, and what faith group you are a part of. So Sister White spoke in 1899 about a coming civil war in the USA. Now, the Civil War was in the 1860s in the USA, but what she said there was going to become massive income inequality in society in the cities of China, India, and America, and because the rich control the access to and the price of food, and the poor don't have access to food, this will lead to a new civil war. And that was in 1899. And then she talks about that ushers in the time of trouble of Daniel 12, 1 and 2. So we have these things to look forward to in our future. The third thing that we're seeing today around our world is ideological division. And I think you have ideological division in South Africa as well as anywhere else. The West today, we're polarizing into ideological camps that transcend our national identities and our national differences. And that political polarization reflects underlying and mutually exclusive worldviews that we look at the world differently. And that polarization is affecting the North American division and all of our conferences, institutions, and unions. I'm not sure about how it's affecting you here in South Africa, but it's affecting the church all across Western Europe, in Canada and Australia and New Zealand. And these ideologies are spreading. So I just want to talk about some of this polarization that we see. It's not just in the world, but it's in the church. On the left, we have the rise of critical theory, more popularly known as cultural Marxism. On the right, there's the rise of economic populism, reactionary nationalism, xenophobia, and an emphasis on border, cultural, and economic security. President Trump is an ideal example of that second form of polarization there. And this polarization is affecting all areas of the world church. You see it as you travel around the world. People are polarizing. Churches are polarizing. Families are polarizing. Marriages are polarizing. I mean, was your family united over COVID? Possibly. Probably not. My dad got vaccinated and my mum didn't. Okay, and they discuss that to this day, and thankfully they've been married for 55 years or so. So, they've learned how to discuss their differences, but there's polarization even at a family level that's taking place today. I just want to talk about critical theory for a minute, because that's what's affecting your children. South Africa is one of the leaders in the world in pushing critical gender theory and LGBTQ rights. You must know that, yes? Down here, yes. So why is it called critical theory? Okay, so this is from Horkheimer. He was one of the leaders of critical theory. He was a Marxist philosopher from Nazi Germany. He was Jewish, and he fled Nazi Germany and came to America, and he set up with a few other socialist Jewish philosophers what was known as the Frankfurt School of Philosophy. And he described it this way. He says, whereas a traditional theory is meant to be descriptive of some phenomenon, usually social, and aims to understand how it works and why it works that way. For instance, an anthropologist or a sociologist, they study social groups in order to understand why they work that way. He goes on to say that a critical theory should proceed from a prescriptive normative moral vision for society, that's a Marxist vision, describe how the item being critiqued fails that vision, usually in a systemic sense, so something is systemically racist or systemically homophobic, etc., and then prescribe activism to subvert, dismantle, disrupt, and overthrow or change it. So this use of the word critical is drawn from Marx's insistence that everything be ruthlessly criticized, and from his admonition that the point of studying society is to change it. So the point about critical theory is you make everything problematic in your society so nobody wishes to defend their society anymore. So when you say that this society is systemically racist, nobody in polite society will want to defend that society anymore. If you say that a church is systemically racist, hypothetically speaking, nobody wants to defend that church anymore. You don't have to prove that it's systemically racist, you just have to say it is, and everybody walks away. You say in America that the US flag is systemically racist, nobody wants to defend it anymore. And so by labeling things in this way, well-meaning people who don't want to be thought of negatively in society just walk away, and nobody will defend anything in society anymore. This is what we're seeing in the West. And how does post-modernity influence this? Well, post-modernity has two core principles. One is radical skepticism about whether objective knowledge can be known. And so they say that all truth is subjective, it's situational, it is subject to your personal subjective lived experience of life. And then they also argue that societies are organized by the powerful into hierarchies that preserve the power and position of the elites in society. Those are kind of two governing principles in postmodernism. So there are four consequences to that. One is that all meaningful boundaries must be blurred. So to give you an example, you say, what is a woman? I mean, this is like the touchstone issue right now. What is a woman? Like, I hope somebody here knows what a woman is, all right? But Why is this to be blurred? Well, this is a cup of water here, and this is remote control. If I say this is a cup of water, there must be definition to that, yes? And if I say this is remote control, you have to define what remote control is. But if this cup of water is here, and this remote control says, well, today, I would rather be that cup of water. I want to be treated in society as if I were a cup of water. I identify as a cup of water. Then you have to eliminate the definition of what a cup of water it is in order to accept this as a cup of water. You understand that? That's why you're blurring the boundaries. You're getting rid of the definitions. So if you say, what is a woman? At the moment you define, the moment you define this as a cup of water, you are by definition saying this cannot be a cup of water. That's how boundaries work. Sorry. But if I eliminate the definition of a cup of water, then this can also be a cup of water and be treated as a cup of water by society. Now, in the creation, this world is built on distinctions. Water above and water below, land and sea, night and day, male and female. Life is only possible when we have those distinctions. And in the flood, God eliminated the distinction between land and sea, water above and water below, and most of humanity died. But we can't affect the geography or the geology, but what we're doing our best to do is eliminate the distinction between male and female, which will result in a social collapse. And we're starting to see that around the world today. You know, we have children in America who identify as cats. They're called furries. And their public schools literally have cat litters in the girls' restrooms so that the girls can go to the toilet on the cat litter. And it's like, we've gone crazy. And there was a guy recently spoke to his school board, and he says, my daughter identifies as a terrapin. It's like a turtle. He said, we need to have a terrarium in every schoolroom, heated to 90 Fahrenheit, so that she can feel comfortable in every schoolroom. And the school board sat her, this all caught on YouTube, and looked at him with utter seriousness, because nobody can question this ideology now. If your daughter identifies as a terrapin, then she must be a terrapin. So that's when this is part of critical theory, that is God's creation is going to be taken down by the elimination of all boundaries. Therefore, language, which is viewed as the tool of the oppressor, must now be deconstructed. Nobody knows what a woman is, nobody knows what a man is. You just happen to be a man with a certain biology, but nobody knows what a man is anymore. The idea is that all cultures are equal. You know, banging on a tree or creating Beethoven, Mahler, or Schubert are equal things. I don't think so. But this is now something we must accept. And most importantly, is that now the individual is no longer important. What matters is your group identity. Because some groups are by definition oppressors, and some groups are by definition victims. That's how critical theory works. Marx defined it in economic terms. You have the bourgeoisie at the top and the proletariat at the bottom. And then in post-colonial studies in the 1960s, it became the colonial powers and the colonized nations. That was how it was broken up. And now it's broken up in terms of sexual orientation. So if you're heterosexual, you're an oppressor of everybody else. And then it becomes divided along gender lines. So if you're a male, you're an oppressor of everybody else, and so forth. And so what matters is not you as an individual, but what group you identify as. And some groups are good, and some groups are evil. And the evil groups must be excluded from society. So now we have, in America, you may have it here in South Africa, we literally have colleges offering African-American only graduation services. African-American only dormitories. It's segregation, once again, in the interest of liberal ideology, because the presence of a white person is traumatizing to a black person in this theory. It represents oppression, therefore you have to have a life free of the sight of a white person in your midst. So what we started out was we had to get rid of segregation, now we're bringing it back in the interest of liberal ideology. I mean, it's kind of gone crazy. And so what matters now is not you as a person. Martin Luther King dreamt of a day when you are judged not by the color of your skin, but by the content of your character. That's been done away with now. Now we judge you by the content of your skin or who you want to sleep with, because that's the most important thing about you, and the content of your character is irrelevant. It matters, are you straight or gay? Are you black or white? Are you cisgender or transgender? And depending on where you fall in those questions, you are either good or you are evil. And this is why we have, in America, so many young girls mostly identifying as trans boys now. Because if you're a heterosexual white girl, and you're taught in class that because you're white, you're guilty of all racism of history, and because you're heterosexual, you're guilty of all homophobia and transphobia and all the rest of it in history, and because you're cisgender, you're guilty of all transphobia in history, that's an awful weight of existential burden of guilt put on a 10-year-old girl's shoulders. So that 10-year-old white girl, how does she escape that guilt? She identifies as transgender. And all of a sudden, instead of being the guilty of all human oppression in human history, now she's the ultimate victim. She's not guilty of anything. And the other reason why girls do it in America is because they see Cosmo magazine, these pictures of impossibly beautiful girls everywhere they go, and most teenage girls are kind of awkward and are a bit, shamed about their bodies, and they kind of walk around like this all the time. But nobody cares what teenage boys look like. Teenage boys can have long hair, dirty teeth, and greasy hair, and nobody cares. They smell of body odor, that's what teenage boys do. And so a teenage girl can escape the social pressure to look like a Cosmo magazine by identifying as a boy. Nobody cares what she looks like. And so there are many social factors pushing these things, and critical theory doesn't help the process. It tells the girl she needs to shift from being an oppressor to a victim by going trans. So this ideological division divides society into good and bad groups. We found it in Stalinist Russia in the 20s. Stalin demonized the small farmers. He defined a small farmer very loosely. Basically, if you had a cow or a horse, you were now an oppressor of the landless peasants. And so Stalin forced the collectivization of agriculture in the Soviet Union. He then wiped out the kulaks and then took all the food out of Ukraine. And about 15 million people perished 1929 to 1932, the biggest crime in human history. And so the Russians have a joke, who was Adolf Hitler? They say he was a minor dictator in the time of Joseph Stalin. Like if Hitler killed his millions, Joseph Stalin killed tens of millions of his own people. So this is what happens when a society starts dividing into good groups and bad groups. The logical conclusion is either those groups have to separate or one group gets exterminated. That's the logical conclusion of where this is going. And that is the ideology that's affecting the West today in our institutions, in our colleges in particular. It's affecting Adventist colleges, it's affecting Adventist conferences, and this leads to social demonization, social exclusion, and if it's unrestrained, it leads to social eradication. We see this as what's going to happen at the end of time before Jesus comes again. I've just broken down, the book of Revelation from a Marxist perspective here. You have the eschatological majority will wander after the first piece of Revelation 8:13, accepting the dominant narrative, and the end-time minority will follow the Lamb wherever he leads, rejecting the dominant narrative. The majority will receive the mark of the beast. The minority will have the seal of God on their foreheads. They'll be the majority. The minority will be the minority by definition. The majority will impose economic exclusion and ultimately the death penalty on the minority group, and the minority will be hated by all men and will be persecuted by the majority group. So what we see happening in the world socially and economically with cultural critical theory affecting many, many Western countries, and it's affecting the General Conference and the North American Division and many conferences around the world, it kind of lines up with what we see in Revelation 13, with a dominant majority accepting the majority narrative, persecuting and seeking to wipe out the minority group. And that cuts across all racial and economic lines, it's along spiritual lines. So, Megatrend 4, papal domination. Now, somebody said to me, don't preach about the papacy, because you guys have heard enough about the papacy. Is that right? No? Well, I'm not going to talk much about the papacy, other than to say, I'm just going to give you a few quotes from the encyclicals that deal with what the papacy is looking for. And I'm just going to read through these, and you get the gist of this. So in 1931, Pius XI brought out an encyclical that was imaginatively named the 40th year. And it was the 40th year after another encyclical that came out in 1891 that dealt with the papacy's attitude to economics. And so Pope Pius XI said, we lay down the principles long since clear established by Leo XIII, that was in the encyclical of 1891, hence this is 40 years later, that it is our right, that is the right of the papacy, and their duty to deal authoritatively with spiritual problems. Is that what it says? No. The papacy claims the right to deal authoritatively with what kind of problem? Social and economic. Now, you and I thought in our naivety that's what governments are responsible for. And the papacy claims in their infallible encyclicals they have that right. After Vatican II, one of the encyclicals that came out in 1965 said, it is the right of public authority to prevent anyone from misusing his private property to the detriment of the common good. So the public authority defines the public good, and then the public authority has the right to make sure that you only use your property in harmony with the common good. That's a textbook definition of economic fascism. That's how Hitler's Germany worked. That's how Mussolini's Italy worked. So if you want to know where the papacy is ideologically, they're very close to fascism. And that's why, one of the reasons why the papacy was hand in hand with Nazi Germany all the way through World War II, and why they helped so many of the Nazi war criminals escape. Pope Paul VI put out an encyclical in 1967, all rights whatsoever, including those of property and free commerce, are to be subordinated to this principle. He's talking about the common good. Now, so from the time of Thomas Aquinas, in the 1200s onwards, Catholic theologians talk about four kinds of law. There's divine law, which is who God is and how he works, and then there is natural law, and that's how societies organize themselves in response to divine law, such as how your government, the national laws of your government. Then there's an applied law below that, which is kind of man-made law that deals with stuff not covered in divine law. Then there's the Ten Commandments and a few other bits at the bottom. And what the Catholics argue from Thomas Aquinas onward is that the natural law, how God intends the world to operate, is that God intends for the common ownership of everything, that nobody has private property. And therefore, private property is a temporary thing that is allowed for by human law, but it's not something intended for in divine law. And therefore, if you are going to have private property in a society, then the public authority has the right to determine how you use it for what the public authority determines to be the common good. You following this? So if you have private property, you have rand in the bank, you ultimately, in Catholic philosophy and Catholic dogma, have no right to determine how that's used. Who is going to be this public authority? Well, you're probably guessing it's the papacy, but we'll see what they say about it. 1967, Paul VI says this: "This international collaboration on a worldwide scale requires institutions that will prepare, coordinate, and direct until finally there is established an order of justice which is universally recognized. Who does not see thus the necessity of thus establishing progressively a world authority capable of acting effectively in the judicial and political sectors?" And when you read Klaus Schwab, the chair of the World Economic Forum, a lot of his writings are taken straight from the papal encyclicals. So in the economic sphere, he's pushing for what the papacy is already pushing for, its encyclicals. In the Catechism of the Roman Catholic Church, paragraph 2188, it talks there about the common good. In respecting religious and the common good of all, Christians should seek recognition of Sundays and the church's holy days as legal holidays. And so in the Catechism, they're teaching new members of the Catholic Church that Sunday is a manifestation of achieving what is good for society. It's in the common good to have Sunday sacredness. It goes, Pope Francis in 2015, Laudato Si, which is all praise be unto you, and that was before the Paris Climate Change Treaty. He gave two reasons why we need Sunday lockdowns. One was to preserve the planet from the endless cycle of economic consumption, and the other was so that we can all become good Catholics and celebrate the Eucharist. And so this is what he put up here in Laudato Si. He said on Sundays, this is an environmental encyclical, but he still talks about Sunday. On Sunday, our participation in the Eucharist has special importance. Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath, yes, is meant to be a day which heals our relationship with God, with ourselves and others, and with the world. All right, so he goes on to talk a bit more about it, but in Pope Francis's encyclical there, Sunday sacredness is part of the common good, and it's necessary for us to heal the world. And then just a few weeks ago, the Pope came out with another, this is called an exhortation, called Laudate Deum, which means praise be unto God. It's Latin, and you can find it there on the Vatican.va website, and you can download it. It's in multiple languages. I'm not sure if it's in Afrikaans, but it probably is. It's in many, many languages. And this is his latest thoughts on the climate crisis as he sees it. And he echoes what Klaus Schwab argues for in the Great Reset. He said, "It is not helpful to confuse multilateralism with a world authority, concentrated in one person or in an elite with excessive power. When we talk about the possibility of some form of world authority regulated by law, we need not necessarily think of a personal authority. We are speaking above all of more effective world organizations equipped with the power to provide for the global common good." And when you hear the phrase the common good, you need to run a mile, because that phrase has been used in history to kill millions of people through the Soviet Union. When the government determines what is the common good, then it has the right to kill you if you stand in the way of the common good. He goes on to say that this authority has the power for the elimination of hunger and poverty and the sure defense of fundamental human rights. The issue is that he must be endowed with real authority in such ways to provide for the attainment of certain essential goals. He goes on to say, this is paragraph 42, our world has become so multipolar and at the same time so complex that a different framework for effective cooperation is required. It is not enough to think only of balances of power, but also of the need to provide a response to new problems and to react with global mechanisms to environmental, public health, cultural, and social challenges, particularly in order to consolidate respect for our most elementary human rights, social rights, and protection of our common home. It is a matter of establishing global and effective rules that can permit providing for this global safeguarding. Now, when you read this kind of language and you read who it's coming from, this stuff is very worrying. Like, did any of you see the movie called, I flew in the other night, I'm tired. There's a movie about the Wannsee Conference. Are you familiar with the Wannsee Conference? It was in like December 1940 or December 1941. The head of the SS, Himmler, gathered about 20 government officials to a country home in Wannsee in Berlin, and that's where the final solution was planned and agreed upon. But they didn't use the word extermination or killing in the entire process. It was always couched in administrative language. And the movie, somebody kept the transcript. Himmler tried to destroy the transcript, but one transcript was kept, and the movie is simply the transcript of that conference. And you hear them debating, how they're going to process the excess populations of Europe, and nobody was wanting to deal with the real issues that were being addressed. It was always couched in administrative terms. There'd be special processing centers and so forth, and relocation. And one of the major concerns was if we kill 6 million people and half of them are married to German citizens, then the probate courts are going to be snarled up with cases for the next 100 years, and the probate courts can't deal with that because who gets the inheritances? That's one of their concerns. And so the point of what I'm saying is that when you see opaque language like this coming from global figures, and you realize how opaque language, administrative language, has been used in the past, you realize that something is being planned that is not something you probably agree with. Let's put it that way. He goes on to say, if there is serious interest in making COP28, that's the upcoming climate change conference in Dubai, this later, I think it's almost about upon us now, a historic event that honors and ennobles us as human beings, and one can only hope for binding forms of energy transition that meet 3 conditions. They must be efficient, obligatory, and readily monitored. So the papacy is calling for a one world authority that has the power to impose regulations globally. Those can be, they're efficient, they are enforceable at a global level, and come back to what Pius said in 1931, that it is the papacy's right and duty to deal authoritatively with social and economic problems. So you read elsewhere in the papal encyclicals, and Pope John Paul II was calling for the papacy to be that one world authority. This is dogma. This is like infallible teaching of the God through his ambassador on earth, the vicar of Christ, known as the Pope. To humanity, the Pope is claiming the right to deal authoritatively with all the world's problems. And we don't just preach about it as Adventists. You just have to read the Catholic encyclicals and see, oh, this is what they're pushing for. So these are some of the challenges that we're facing. So let's talk about Megatrend 5, reaching the unreached. And some of you know these things. So this is what we see in the mission field about how God is responding to these challenges we're facing. The first is that Jesus is appearing to people in dreams all around the world. It's a global phenomenon. And if you check out this website later on, that's aimed at Muslims. It's in multiple languages. And you will see that we have the book of Revelation in our hands. Many Muslims don't have access to the Bible at all, and they don't have access to the book of Revelation. And if you go you scroll down that website where it says share your dream, the people who run that, they post every day some of the dreams that come in, and there's a lot of them come in every day, and you'll see that most of those visions are taken straight from the book of Revelation. You recognize them straight out of Revelation. 3 angels flying in the midst of heaven, Jesus walking among the lampstands, Revelation 1, Jesus coming on his horse with a sword coming out of his mouth, Revelation 19, the final judgment, Revelation 20. You see the Muslims are receiving almost the same visions that John got 2,000 years ago. And in all of those visions, Jesus says a few things. He always calls himself by a name in the scriptures, such as the Good Shepherd, or I am the way, the truth, and the life. And then he invites the Muslim to follow me. And this is a global phenomenon. And so we may think of Islam as being, the center of, all kinds of nasty things. But Jesus sees beyond the veil of Islam, and the call to come out of her, my people, applies to people caught up in the confusion of Islam as much as to the confusion of Catholicism. And if Jesus is appealing to Muslims to come out of Islam and to follow him, and if we're to be followers of Jesus, that means our attitude to Muslims is that that's our future brothers and sisters, and we are to follow Jesus, inviting people out of Islam into God's remnant people. There can't be any hatred if we're trying to win them for Christ. So this is what we see happening around the world. And these dreams started happening in about the year 2000. And it's interesting that in the year 1995 to 1999, Al-Qaeda was on the rise. And it just seems from a missiological perspective that Satan is muddying the waters. And the more violence and the more terrorism he creates in the Muslim world, the harder it is for devout Muslims to follow the call of Jesus to become his disciples. Because most Muslim terror killings are on fellow Muslims, they're not of Christians. It's overwhelmingly Muslim on Muslim killings. And the reason for that is that when Muhammad was fighting against some people from Mecca, I think it was, he called the Muslims of Medina to come and follow him into battle, and a bunch of them didn't follow him into battle. And when he got back with all the war booty, the guys who had fought, they said to him, well, Muhammad, they said, what are we going to do with these guys here? And to paraphrase Muhammad, he said, well, they are hypocrites in their Muslim faith. It is your duty to kill them. And that idea that you kill the hypocrites within the Muslim faith means that Shias kill Sunnis and Sunnis kill Shias, and they all kill Ahmadiyya Muslims. And if your interpretation of the Trinity is different to mine, I have a religious duty to kill you. If you're in an Adventist context, all right. Now, thankfully, Sister White didn't say anything of the sort. I mean, praise the Lord that you deal with hypocrites in that way. But that's why most of the violence in the Muslim world is aimed at fellow Muslims. They have a religious duty to purify the faith. We also see that God is setting people free from Satan and from satanic oppression. And there's a website there, you can download a manual on this. The GC asked us in AFM to put this together in 2018. We did it in 2018. And now we do training sessions for pastors in many parts of the world. Demonization takes many forms. You can have out-and-out possession. You rarely see possession among Christians, but it does happen. You have much more common is harassment. Every Christian faces harassment by Satan because Satan was wroth with the woman and went off to make what? War on the remnants of her children. So if you're a Christian, you have a target on your back anyway. And then if you indulge in a private sin, an unconfessed sin, the most common problem on Christians these days is pornography, you will start playing with that sin, and then Satan will control that part of your being before you know it. It could be alcohol, it could be anger, it could be lying, it could be pride, it could be many things, but you play with a private, cherished sin, you think that it's a nice thing that you gain in pleasure from it, but ultimately it controls you, and Satan controls you through that. And so he has control of a part of your life. And the solution to it is not just willpower, it's actually asking Jesus to set you free in the various ways that missionaries do that. So we see that God is still setting people free from the control of Satan. And we may not talk about it much in, your average Adventist church, but this kind of stuff is needed in every Adventist church, I can tell you. And in the early church, in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, because people coming from a pagan background, they were actually, before they were baptized, they always had a ritual deliverance process. Because when you come from a pagan background, the assumption is you bring demons into the church. And we know that's possible because in Mark 1, where there was Jesus was in the synagogue and he was reading the scriptures, there was a man there with a demon. And nobody else realized he had a demon until the demon spoke up. And Judas had a demon. In John 6, verse 71, Jesus says, and in one of you is a diabolos, a devil. And Judas had that devil through his entire ministry. And in John 13, just before he dies, it said Satan entered into him. So it's possible for Christians and indeed conference treasurers, based on the example of Judas, to have a demon. So I don't know who your conference treasurer is. If you're present here today, I'm not making any assumptions. Please don't be offended. But it's true. You can bring a demon into the church and not know about it. And as Western Christians, we don't take this stuff seriously. We say, oh, you've got a psychiatric problem. Maybe. They brought a young boy to Jesus with epilepsy in Matthew 17, and Jesus treated it as demonization. So mental health can be expression of demonization. It may be expression of other things, such as deep-seated trauma or a brain injury. So just because you have a mental health problem doesn't mean you're demonized. But when you do have a mental health problem, you can't exclude the possibility that it's demonization, in which case the cure is not medication for some people, it's casting out the demon. So it's not an either-or situation. There's a lot of overlap there. And a lot of Christians have this problem. A lot of Adventists have this problem as well. The third thing we see today in the mission field, as we come to the coming of Jesus again, is that Satan is attacking God's people through persecution. And I alluded to it this morning in my sermon, but in the time of Christ, Christ was declared, he was condemned to death by Pontius Pilate. He was the civic ruler. And today we have civic rulers like Kim Jong-il up in North Korea who are busy killing and imprisoning all the Christians they can. And communist China goes through sometimes lenient and sometimes they imprison the Christians. Then you have religious leaders. It was the religious leaders condemned Jesus. In Sri Lanka today, it's the Buddhist monks lead the persecution against Christians. In the Middle East, it's the Muslim jihad clerics who preach jihad against Christians. Hamas in Gaza Strip preach the elimination of Christians worldwide, as well as the elimination of Jews. And so religious persecution comes from religious leaders, as it happened in the time of Christ. It also comes from business leaders. When Paul was preaching the gospel in Ephesus in Acts 17, and then they had, then remember there was, the goldsmiths got together because they were losing the sale of their little statues of Diana of the Ephesians, and they gathered a mob in the amphitheater there, and they cried, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians," for a number of hours there, and the civic leaders said to Paul, "Don't go into the amphitheater, you'll be in trouble." And so persecution by business leaders is something that has happened in the church, and it's happening today. So if you work for the province of Gauteng and you put on your social media that I believe marriage is only between a biological man and a biological woman, how long are you going to keep your job in the public sector? Like some of you are shaking your heads. Not long, yes? If you work for not Coca-Cola but Woca-Cola, and if you say in Woca-Cola that, you know, I believe marriage is between a biological male and a biological female, you're going to lose your job. You don't have any religious rights because you're guilty allegedly of a hate crime. So these days, business leaders, people like Apple are one of the most determined in this area to impose a new vision on society. So Apple Corporation, mob rule. If the civic society and the religious leaders and the business leaders can't get their will done, then they'll turn to the mob. So if you live in Pakistan today and somebody wants your house or wants your business, they'll just claim that, "Oh, I heard you blaspheming the prophet." Guaranteed there'll be a mob tearing down your house and tearing down your business, trying to tear you limb from limb. And the police will stand by and do nothing until the mob has done its worst. About 6 weeks ago, there was an attack on some Christian ladies in northeast India. They were stripped naked, sexually assaulted in the streets, paraded through the streets naked, with the men assaulting them. It was all caught on camera. It went viral in India on the internet. And those Christian women were humiliated in the worst possible way, all live streamed. And they were being attacked because they were Christians. And eventually the Prime Minister, Modi, stepped in, and the police were watching. They didn't try to stop the mob. The Prime Minister stopped in, and his take on it was, India must do its most to protect all of its women. Well, yes, that's true, but they weren't being targeted because they were women. They were being targeted because they were Christian women. That's the issue there. But he wasn't going to say that because he's a Hindu nationalist prime minister. So when the government can't get what it wants, it lets the mob on the street do its dirty work. Then they pick up the pieces afterwards. Then you get family pressure. And some of you are familiar with this kind of family pressure. It started with Cain and Abel. We might say it started with Adam and Eve, when she gave him the apple. Yes? And we won't go too much into that, all right? Let's take it more safely, because the women won't get offended. Adam, Cain and Abel, all right? There was family pressure there. Well, I'm going to kill you. So it started with Cain and Abel, and it comes down to families today. And honor killings happen all around the world. But if you come from a family who do not approve of you becoming an Adventist, you know what family pressure looks like. And some parents will accept what you believe, and some will ostracize you for the rest of your life. Some people are disinherited by their parents because they become an Adventist. That pressure takes place in many different ways. And so, as we get closer to the coming of Jesus, so these sources of persecution get more and more fierce. Now, these are 4 websites I'd encourage you to look at. Voice of the Martyrs was established by Richard Wurmbrand, famous pastor from Ceausescu's Romania. He suffered brutal torture for many years. He was held underground in a solitary confinement for 3 straight years at one point. And his wife was also tortured. He came to America in the late 60s and established Voice of the Martyrs. And it's called persecution.com. It's a great website, persecution.com. And it's always linked to the marital websites. Sorry, that's a joke, but never mind. Open Doors USA, they chart the persecution of Christians around the world, how many people are dying. This is a nice series for teenagers. And the US State Department has the Commission on International Religious Freedom. You go to their website there, and every about February they produce an annual report on what's happening in every country around the world. Now, if you take the time to read even just like the last 5 years, you'll see that the number of countries going from being neutral to Christians to hostile is growing every single year. It's becoming socially acceptable to persecute and kill Christians around the world. And the media, which is by and large secular, doesn't cover it. They have no problem with the persecution of Christians. So this is just an indication of what it's going to be like. Now, as a more extreme example, we now know that when those Hamas guys attacked southern Israel just recently, they weren't just killing and raping. How they were killing was pretty brutal. There's evidence now they were taking babies and putting them in the ovens and turning the ovens on. They weren't just shooting the babies, they were baking them alive in the ovens. Because that's what Hitler did, put the Jews in ovens. So they did the same thing. And all around the West, you've got these university students cheering on Hamas and defending the Palestinians. I'm not making a comment on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict here. What I'm saying is that that level of violence is now socially acceptable when it's politically correct. The roasting of babies in ovens is now politically acceptable if it's on the right side of critical theory. You get the point? So if it's okay, and if it's okay to roast babies alive and slit open pregnant mothers and take old people who can't move from their seats and pour gasoline on them and burn them, if it's okay to do that, and a large part of Western political society celebrates and defends their right to do that because they're the oppressed, then that gives an indication of the tolerance of extreme violence against the followers of Jesus before he comes again. So we're in for a rough ride. And it's why when some people die, I take comfort from the fact that they're not going to see that time of trouble. Because some people may not survive that. So I encourage you to educate yourself about those things. It's important to educate yourself because Paul says in 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 and 4, he says, I write these things, effectively he says this, so that we who've experienced persecution can bless you who have yet to experience persecution. What he's saying is that the persecuted church has lessons for the free church of today. We who experience freedom today and don't go through persecution, we need to be learning lessons from the persecuted church. And it's not just Fox's Book of Martyrs from the 1600s, it's what's happening on planet Earth right now. And the level of violence that is acceptable against other groups if it's the right group doing the violence. So it's up to us to learn about these things, to educate ourselves about these things, and to make sure there's nothing coming between us and God. So when mandates are imposed, we don't go against our conscience, but we follow those mandates because we have other false gods in our lives. In the last 3 years, many people went along with mandates, not because they believed it was the right thing to do, but because their job was their idol. Their family finances was their idol. Social respectability was their idol. Their professional licensing was the dominant thing in their life. They were willing to go against their conscience because there was something else important in their lives. And when the final crisis comes, anything that's important in your life will be used against you to get you to bow to the mandates. That's why for some people it's in the forehead, they believe in it. For other people, it's in the hand. That means, like in the COVID mandates, you're forced to do these things because you have other gods in your life. And so we talk about the fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath day, but we're not going to be able to keep the Sabbath day if we're disobedient to the first commandment, which is you shall have no other gods before me. If we have other gods in our life, we're vulnerable to mandates. So if you want to do your best and my best to make sure that I'm not vulnerable to mandates, I need to make sure that there are no other gods in my life. There's nothing I'm not willing to give up and walk away from, because that's how the pressure will be brought. Does this make sense to everybody? Yes. It's sobering stuff, but the good news is God is still calling missionaries. And Sister White talks about in Acts of the Apostles, she says there is the privilege of every Christian not only to look for, but to hasten the coming of the Savior. And we hasten the coming of the Savior by taking the gospel to the ends of the earth. So here's a map of planet Earth, and I recognize that Africa is out of all proportion. You know, Africa on these maps is always much smaller than it really is, yes? I think Africa is bigger than all this lot together. And Australia probably in there. Africa is a big continent, but it's kind of foreshortened here because of the way you turn a globe into a rectangle. But if that's planet Earth, that's the 1040 mission window right there. It's there's the equator. So it's 10 degrees to 40 degrees north of the equator. That's the home of Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and atheism. Those are the major spiritual giants. So even though we've conquered Mount Everest right there, we've still to conquer those spiritual mountains. So there are more people live within this circle than outside of that circle on planet Earth. That's where most fish are. And if you want to go fishing, you go where the fish are. Isn't that right? Like if you go hunting, anybody here hunt? You want to know where the animals are at certain times. You don't go sitting on the middle of the motorway waiting for a buck to appear in midday, because there's no bucks going to be there on the motorway at midday. You're going to go where the bucks are at a certain time. So that's where more people live than anywhere else on planet Earth. Gives you an idea of where the greatest need for missionaries is. Within that circle, I've just drawn from you up there, that has the largest Hindu country in the world, that's India. The largest Buddhist countries in the world, so China, Thailand, Japan, Myanmar. And the largest Muslim countries in the world, and it's nowhere in the Middle East, the largest Muslim countries in the world are Indonesia, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And the most commonly spoken language among Muslims today is actually English. It's not Arabic. Most Muslims, if they can recite the Quran, have no idea what they're reciting. But they're told that simply reciting it has a sanctifying effect, even if you don't understand what you're saying. But the largest Sikh country in the world is there, that is India. The largest Shinto country in the world, that is Japan, and the largest atheist country in the world, and that is China. So this is an area that requires as many people as possible. So on the slide there, if you have 1.5 billion Christians in the world today, let's say a third of them are practicing their faith, they're born-again Christians. That's a generous estimate. So 500 million people is represented by this part of the world here, in blue. And if you want to know how many Adventists are in the world, Laos and Cambodia has about 22 million people. Those two little countries, those are the Adventists in the world today, if you just represent them as a nation state. If you had all the nominal Christians in the world, it's all of Southeast Asia and China. Well, say 1.8, 1.9 billion people. Then if you add in there the numbers of people who live near a Christian, or have access to the gospel. There's a church in their community, like here in Cape Town. They can have Christian radio, Christian internet. There are bookstores that sell Bibles. You'd add in all those yellow countries there. And if you want to know where the people live in the world who have no access to the gospel, in terms of if you just put them in countries, that's the world today. That's why we still need missionaries. That's why we have Adventist World Radio. That's why we have Hope Channel. That's why we have all of our Christian Adventist ministries, because the task before us is huge. And when we say Jesus is coming soon, we're obviously speaking in ignorance of the map, because we've got a long way to go. That's why there's space for all of us in mission work. Every one of us can be involved in this. So why do we get involved in mission service? Well, we asked this question in our Sabbath school class. I'll give you 3 good reasons. One is this gospel of the kingdom we preach to all nations as a witness to them, and then the end shall come. That means that when Jesus comes again, all human suffering comes to an end. Death, disease, drugs, divorce, depression, it all stops. Nothing more. All the suffering in the animal kingdom comes to an end. And if you want a life with significance, contribute to the ending of all human suffering. You may treat somebody as a patient one at a time, but as a gospel worker, however you get involved in gospel work, you are contributing to the end of all human suffering. That's a really powerful motivating factor for me. The second reason is that in Luke 15, Jesus tells 3 parables, one about a lost coin, one about a lost sheep, one about a lost boy, the prodigal son. And in those 3 parables, we read that there is rejoicing in heaven over every sinner that is saved. You remember those parables? That means that when you lead someone to Jesus Christ, the whole cosmos knows about it. That your life isn't just lived out in Cape Town, your life is lived out on a cosmic canvas. And when you lead someone to Jesus Christ, there is rejoicing in heaven, and by implication, there is anger among the demons. That your life now has a universal cosmic significance because you're involved in the great controversy. And thirdly, 2 Corinthians 5, we are constrained or we are compelled by the love of Christ. When we have experienced God's love and his grace for ourselves, you want to pass it on. You know, being in love is like having a bad case of body odor, okay? You can't hide body odor. Is that true? No matter how many layers of clothing you put on, it's going to seep out. Is that right? Somebody say yes, please. Yes. And when you're in love, it seeps out. You know, if you like a young lady or you like a young man, you can't hide it, yes? You keep snatching a glance at them, and you may leave a flower on their desk without them realizing, and everybody knows what's happening. And you may pretend you don't care about somebody, but oh yeah, everybody can see you're in love with that person, and it kind of seeps out like body odor, okay? It's not a good analogy, but you understand what I'm talking about here. And so when we've experienced God's love and we've experienced his grace, we can't stop it or hide it or cover it up with deodorant or clothing. It seeps out of us, and it flows through us to those around us. And people see that what God has done in my life can now flow through me, and he'll do the same for you in your life. So if you want to be involved in gospel work, then first and foremost, we need to ask ourselves, what has God done for me? Have I experienced God's grace for myself? Do I have a living experience of forgiveness in my life and God's love and his grace washing away all my guilt from the past? Have I been filled with hope? Has my body been healed? Has my relationship with my wife or my husband been healed? And if so, then I can pass that on to somebody else. And if you haven't experienced God's goodness and his grace, you can't pass it on to somebody else. So you need to ask first and foremost from God for an experience of his grace, and then it can flow through you to those around you. And that is why we still need missionaries today. That's why Martinique Torlaga was speaking about mission service today. And I know that there are Christians in all these areas, but this is, if you just add up all the people who've yet to hear the name of Jesus, they would fill all those red countries on the globe there today. So, something for you to be thinking about. The New South Wales Conference has produced 3 excellent little manuals on church planting, how to plant house churches, church multiplication booklets, launching and growing a house church movement. I'd encourage you to check those things out. They're free for download on the internet. I'd encourage you to buy these 3 books. They're written in Korean and English, and it's from the experience of the Christians of North Korea living under Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il. And so the books are 120 pages long, but every other page is written in Korean, so it's only 60 pages, and it's an easy read. But this is called Preparing for the Underground Church, Planting the Underground Church, and Living in the Underground Church. And before Jesus comes again, that's where we're all going to be. I want to encourage you to be thinking about this. This is important because, let's say in Cape Town, if the government in South Africa decides to ban and to strip the legal status of the Cape Conference, and the Cape Conference ceases to exist legally, and it has no bank account and it can't employ pastors and all the rest of it, and this church gets closed down because you can't worship here without general liability insurance, okay, that's the reality of a conference losing its legal status. That does not mean that the church has been closed down. All it means is that the people in the church meet in other places. You meet in the parks, you meet in people's homes, you meet in people's garages and so forth. The church does not need a legal structure to be the church of God. And when we talk about the church, we've come to assume that the church is the legal hierarchy, but that's not the church. The church is the covenant-keeping people of God who love one another, who gather for praise and prayer, Bible study, and they engage in witness and ministry together. Those are the 5 characteristics of a New Testament church. We gather for praise, We gather for prayer, we gather for study of the Word of God, and we engage together in ministry and in witness. 5 things. Those are the 5 components of a New Testament church. And it doesn't require a conference, it doesn't require a building, it doesn't require pastors, it doesn't require bank accounts. It's God's people meeting and working together. And that's where we're going to be before Jesus comes again. So I want to encourage you, get these books. They're pretty short. You can read them, if you fly from here to Joburg in the morning, you'll read one of them before you get to Joburg. They're not that long, but every word is a bit like gold in those books because it's written out of the experience of the underground Christians of North Korea who live under the most horrendous persecution today. And we need to be thinking about these things, and we need to be preparing for it. And we need to be living as a church, preparing things and doing programs in our church so that our members are prepared for when that moment arrives. The Apostle Paul talks about it in Ephesians 6. After having described the armor of God, he says, you may put on all this armor, he says, so that you may be able to stand firm on that evil day. What he's saying is that evil day comes to every Christian of persecution. It'll reach your front door whether you like it or not. And so you put on the armor of God so that you can stand firm when you're not going to run when that evil day comes knocking on your door. It's a sobering thing I'm talking about here. But some people view their job as preserving the institutions of the past, and that's not what God has called us for, I believe. God has called us to prepare the church for what's coming before Jesus comes again. My job here is not to save Cape Conference or Michigan Conference or Loma Linda University or whatever it is. That's not my job. I really don't care about those things. Our job and my job is to prepare people to meet Jesus Christ. Because when Jesus comes again, this building will burn down. Every Adventist conference building will burn to the ground. Even the division will burn to the ground. And the working policy manual will be destroyed, and all the bank accounts and financial reserves of the church will be gone forevermore. So let's not worry too much about these things. What's more important is saving souls and preparing people spiritually for that final crisis. So conclusions. I've gone on for a bit here, I'm sorry. Number 1, position your life so that the corrupt powers of this world have as few pressure points on you as possible. Knowing what's coming, position your life now so that the world has as few pressure points on you as possible. Get rid of the other gods in your life. If your God is your financial status, or your God is your professional license, or your God is your hobby, then it's time to reevaluate. And so position your life so that the powers of this world can put as few pressure points on you as possible, so you can withstand as the pressure comes up on God's commandment-keeping people at the end of time. Prepare yourselves spiritually, financially, and emotionally. So if I were a pastor here, which I'm not, if I were a pastor, my job is to prepare the flock for when I'm no longer here, because the first people to be taken up in persecution are the pastors. And if you're the spiritual leader of your household, you need to prepare your household for the day when maybe you're not around. Can they still survive as functional Christians? Do they know how to have worship together? Do they know how to study the Bible together? Do they engage in family worship with or without you? So we're to prepare those we have responsibility for the day when maybe I'm not around anymore. They can continue their gospel work, their Christian life, and their life of witness. So preparing ourselves financially, spiritually, and emotionally is an important thing to do. Invest in gospel work while you have the freedom to do so. This is important. The dollar is going down in value, the rand is going down in value. What inflation means in a country is that you're being devalued. It's not just that money loses value, it's that you lose value as a human being. And why do I say that? Because you reach the point like in Weimar, Germany in the 1920s, where you can work for 1 trillion German marks and you can't buy a loaf of bread with it at the end of the week. That means your labor, with inflation, your labor is worth less and less. If it takes you 40 hours to earn enough money to buy your week's worth of food, now you have to work 45 hours after the last 2 years. And the inflation continues the way it is, you'll have to work 80 hours to get the same amount of food. That means your labor is being devalued. That means that you are being devalued as an economic asset, and you reach the point where it's not worth working because the money from inflation is not worth buying anything. Inflation also means that your savings, which are the store of the value of your cumulative labor, those savings are being eroded every day in front of you. So there's no point in working because you can't store the value of your labor. Inflation also means that people make very bad economic choices. They make good choices at an individual level, but those choices are disastrous for the economy at a national level. So if you have 10% inflation, then when you get your salary, you have no interest in putting your money in the bank and get savings at 1% year interest, because you're guaranteed to lose 9% of that money. So you have a financial incentive to spend your money as soon as you can, and if everybody follows that rational course, then inflation picks up even more. And so it's a rapid downward spiral. This happened in Zimbabwe a few years ago, it happened in Weimar, Germany, and it's starting to happen in countries in the West now, that economic doom loop that we're all getting caught up in. So invest in the gospel while you have the freedom to do so, and while your rand or dollars or yen or euros have some purchasing power. I'd really recommend this. Buy Great Controversies. There's going to come a time when Great Controversy is a banned book. Stock up on Great Controversies while you can. Stock up on Steps to Christ and Thoughts from the Mount of Blessing and those books, because there will come a time when those books are banned as hate speech. As a church, invest in literature, because even when we invest in media ministries, that's kind of glamorous and sexy, but there's going to come a time when we're off the internet and we're off the radio waves, but you can still give out books. So invest in all the media you can, but support a missionary as well, but also invest in literature, because people can't take that off the air. They can't cancel literature. Once it's on somebody's bookshelf, it's there until the police come looking door to door with it. So build relationships of trust with your local brothers and sisters. All the way through the last 150 years, all the totalitarian regimes we've lived in, what Christians have had to fear the most is whether their brothers or sisters will turn them in. Happens in China, happened in the Soviet Union, happened in Nazi Germany, happened in Pol Pot's regime, happened in Chile with Pinochet, with the other guy down there, Pinochet. Galtieri in Argentina was persecutor as well. You need to be able to trust your brothers and sisters. Like if you become a hunted man or a hunted woman, where are you going to go? Do you know an Anne Frank who would preserve you? Anne Frank preserved Jews. Little girl over there in Holland. Do you have an Anne Frank figure in your life, or are you willing to be an Anne Frank for somebody else? Because it may come down to that, and in parts of the world today, like in Afghanistan, we're already there. So if you look around the pews to your left and right, do you know these people? Do you know where they live? Do you know what you can be praying for on their behalf? Do you actually care about them as a person? If you never saw them again, if you didn't see them for 6 months, would you even notice? Would they know that you noticed that you haven't seen them for 6 months? Or do we just sit in the pews and we just, okay, it's nice to see a full church, but I actually know about 2 people well, and the rest of them I really don't know about? Like, do we know our brothers and sisters? Do we care for each other? Do we know where we live? Do we look out for each other? Do we help each other? Do we pray for each other or not? If we're not doing that now, we're not going to have a network of support when that final crisis comes. And my wife says I have a real good habit of spreading fear and depression, so I just want to say the opposite of that. Choose hope and faith every morning, because as we saw this morning, Jesus is coming again. And that's when all things will be made right again. So this too shall pass. And so choose hope and faith every morning, because in Luke's gospel, when Jesus talks about the environmental degradation and the waves of the sea are roaring back and forth, and men's hearts are failing them for fear, he then says, but now you're going to look up and say that look up for your salvation is drawing nigh. That we are to be people of hope and faith. Faith in Jesus and hope that he's coming again. And we don't just call it the blessed hope. I would say to you today that the coming of Jesus is humanity's only hope. Because we've all got this world into a terrible mess. And every community and every nation has got blood on his hands, and so does Jesus, but only Jesus is innocent of the blood on his hands. That's what distinguishes him from every power on earth. Only he is innocent of the blood on his hands. And that's why he can be Savior for all people. So choose hope and faith every morning. And despite all I've spoken about for the last hour and a half, please choose hope and faith every morning. I talk about these things in churches because too many people are just gliding on saying things will always be as they always have been. And this world has changed. We've changed sociologically and economically and politically in the last 3 years. And we're not going back to how it was before. We have now legitimized the demonization of minorities in society. We've legitimized the economic exclusion of minorities in society. And one minute you're good neighbors, and the next minute they're part of the majority narrative, and you're a hated minority. And it was amazing in the last 3 years how quickly the world turned on certain groups of people. So this stuff can happen real fast, and we're ultimately not fighting against President Biden or your president down here. Ultimately, our enemy is Satan. That's who our enemy is. We don't fight against flesh and blood. We're not fighting this political party or another. Our enemy is Satan and the forces and the authorities of evil in the heavenly realms. We're fighting a demonic battle. That's where these problems come from. So let's not get caught up in the politics of this world. We are servants of the kingdom of God. We serve the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We are his disciples. We obey his commandments above anybody else's commandments. We are not to follow the laws of the nations in which we live if they contradict with the laws of God. And people are to see in our lives a manifestation of the goodness of the King whom we serve. That's who we represent. So my prayer for us as a congregation here is that people will see Jesus in us, and we will walk with Jesus every day, and he will be the only Lord and Savior in our lives, and we will not have financially or emotionally or spiritually compromised lives, so that when that final crisis comes, we know what we ought to do, but we don't have the heart to do it. So may God bless you, and maybe have a walk this evening, or cheer up, okay? But please, choose faith and hope every morning. So I'll end that now, and maybe you can end the live stream now. That'd be possible. Sometimes I do a Q&A in churches, and people ask questions, and those are not to be broadcast on the internet, because people ask very direct questions sometimes, and I don't want those questions, the answers going out, because I get into enough trouble as it already is. So, with that in mind,